Hi pet lovers, thank you for joining Gina's grooming channel and thank you for joining us on another episode of our vlog where we discuss grooming industry subjects for aspiring groomers or for pet lovers. Welcome. Today's subject is going to be to cut or not to cut. So the truth behind pet haircuts. So we are going to go ahead and discuss what kind of pets should be getting haircuts, right? And what kind of pets absolutely should not. So let's go ahead and jump in and discuss the truth about pet haircuts. Before we jump in, I do want to mention that all pets, so all of our pets that live in our home and share our lives with us, should be groomed. They should be groomed in some way. Either you do it in home or they should be professionally groomed because of the health benefits. But we are talking about actual haircuts. So going ahead and giving a pet a full trim, a full haircut, not talking about neatening up and doing a little bit of neatening and tidying up. Full haircuts is what we're going to be talking about today and what pets really should be getting it and which pets should not. Now we're going to keep this in the general context of grooming, so our dogs and our cats, right? So our canines and our felines. But most of the discussion is going to be dealing with dogs because I will tell you this, that a lot of the logic that we're going to be discussing does apply to our felines. So kind of just to give you the finish line in terms of what the answer is, whether or not cats should get haircuts, they absolutely should not. I'm not talking about little trims or little sanitaries or shaving under their paw pads. There are things that we can do with our kitty cats. But in terms of giving them a shave down, giving them a haircut, it's not supposed to be done. And again, we're going to talk about the logic for the dogs, and that should give you a pretty good understanding of why we shouldn't do that for our cats. And a note to our newbie groomers, right? So our aspiring groomers out there, this conversation can be really confusing. You're going to hear a lot of things out there, and I will say even going to grooming school, there was no real definitive answer, which I am going to give you today with some caveats, of course. But just know that it can get confusing. So you're learning that you shouldn't be shaving down double-coated breeds, but really the obvious answer of what the differentiator of what pets should be getting haircuts versus what pets shouldn't be getting haircuts is kind of confusing. So hopefully we're going to go ahead and clean that mess up a little bit for you and give you a definitive answer so that when you're dealing with clients, especially as an aspiring groomer or a newbie groomer, you can go ahead, stand with confidence and tell clients the right thing to do and what is right for their pet. So because we're going to be talking about dogs, let's go ahead and focus on really how dogs have developed over the years and their interaction with humans. And just as a personal note, I'm all about no GMOs, and I try to eat organic as much as I can. But let's look at dogs and really recognize that they are GMO. They are genetically modified by humans. Over the centuries, we've gone ahead and modified them based on different genetic manipulations, also dealing with mutations that can occur and also doing selective breeding to be able to go ahead and take these dogs and make them service us, right? This is our history with them being hunting dogs, service dogs, all sorts of things, and also develop the way that they look and the way that they move, right, for our purposes as humans. So before we even jump into why there are so many differences with dogs, know that humans have genetically modified them, right, from their ancestors as wolves, and now we have to take care of them differently because of that. So there are different types of coats on dogs. There's generally, in a broad sense, 6 accepted different types of coats, but we're not really going to be focusing on them today, although we will have that discussion in a future date. But what I really want to focus on is that there is a gene in dogs that determines whether or not their hair is long or short. And within that gene, it's also going to determine whether or not the dog has an undetermined coat length, right? Or a predetermined coat length. So let's go ahead and talk about what those two things mean. So a predetermined coat length means that it stops growing at a certain length depending on what the gene is telling it to do, right? So what the genetic code is telling it is to stop at a certain length. So let's go ahead and take a very common and loved dog. Let's take a lab. And if you look at a lab's coat, right, you're going to go ahead and see that they do have pretty much a uniform coat all around their body. Yeah, maybe a little bit on the chest, maybe a little longer in their pants, in their behind, right, by their butt. But what you're going to see is a uniform length. And if you never cut your lab's hair, it's going to stay the same. What we need to do for these types of dogs is obviously to brush them and to groom them, right? But in terms of cutting that coat, we don't have to, because it stops at the length that is determined by the genome, right? And that's all we have to do, other than brushing, make sure that it stays clean, parasite free. We don't have to worry about changing the length of that coat. Of course, this applies to our smooth and short-coated dogs, so we can take a look at our pugs, we can take a look at our beagles, right? So the list goes on and on in terms of our predetermined length. We also have kind of a mix. If you look at our spaniels, if you look, let's say, at a Cavalier King Charles Spaniel, you'll have a short head, long furnishings on its leg, a short jacket. So just know that there also are mixes, but still, in terms of length, but it is, if it's predetermined, it's only going to grow to a certain length depending on where it is on the body, and then stop. So let's take a look at our undetermined breeds, undetermined coat length breeds and their mixes. Okay, so now we're talking about dogs like poodles, Shih Tzus, Malteses, Bijans. Okay, these dogs, their hair will keep growing if you don't cut it. Okay, so if we don't put clippers or scissors on these dogs and maintain that coat will keep growing and growing and growing. Now, of course, it will break off at a certain point. It won't be nourished by the root. So know that it will at some point break normally, but it will in function keep growing. So we need to give these types of dogs haircuts, right? We need to take them to the groomer, or as home groomers, we need to learn how to give these dogs haircuts at home. So what happens if we don't manage these types of coats, right? I have seen Bijans encased in their own coat, right? Because their coat grew and then it became matted, right? And then it became neglected. And you'll see these dogs in shelters. You'll see them pretty much everywhere. And as a groomer, you'll be doing shave downs, and some owners, they'll go on vacation and their pet sitter won't brush their dog for 8 weeks or whatnot. And this is what happens, is that these types of coats with the undetermined coat length, if they're left to grow long and not managed, right, they're going to go ahead and become a health issue. So we have to give these types of breeds and mixes haircuts to make sure that they stay healthy. And let's talk about dogs that have an undetermined coat length, but they're left in a drop coat. So you'll see this a lot in the show circle, in the show ring with, let's say, a Maltese. They still need to be trimmed on the bottom, around their feet, make sure that nothing is touching the floor, because with Malteses, they're an undetermined coat length, right? So we have to make sure to manage that. Even when you see that drop coat, we still are giving those dogs haircuts. So whittling it all down, you guys see where I'm going with this. Okay, so here is the rule of thumb. If you have predetermined coat length, you normally don't get a haircut. You may get little neatens and trims and things like that, but predetermined length pets do not get haircuts. This is why the cats kind of fit into this, because they have predetermined length, right? It only grows a certain length and then stops. And so the rule of thumb is, what kind of pets must get haircuts, right? Those are the pets with the undetermined coat length, right? The coats that are going to keep growing unless you cut them. In fact, and this is what we learn as aspiring groomers when we start, we know not to shave down double-coated breeds. We talk about coat damage, we talk about skin damage, that the coat isn't going to be coming back the way that it should. So knowing this rule of thumb and not following it can actually cause damage to dogs that should not get haircuts. So let's do also a note on our terriers. This is kind of falls into exceptions. I'm going to finish this conversation with some more exceptions. But terriers are kind of an exception to the rule, because terriers should normally get hand stripped. Our wire-haired terriers should get hand stripped, as they did in history. They basically would be doing work, and the brambles in the bushes would go ahead and take that top coat that was ready to be removed and get that process going so that new top coat can come in. So that's how terriers are supposed to be handled. But because hand stripping is a little complicated, it's hard to find a groomer who will do it. It is very pricey. That is why terriers are kind of an exception to the rule of thumb because they kind of fall into a place where people don't know what to do with them, but we need to keep them shorter. So terriers will normally get haircuts in the world of professional pet grooming for our pet terriers, but really they're not supposed to. They really should be hand stripped. So just want you to be aware of that. So let's look at some of the other exceptions that fall into this rule of thumb. Of course, we just talked about terriers. Let's also talk about the exception, of course, for medical reasons. When you have a medical issue, everything goes off the table. All the rules of thumb of what we should be doing for the coat go off the table if there is a medical need to shave down a pet. So just want to mention that if there is a medical need and the veterinarian says this pet needs to be shaved for whatever reasons the veterinarian requires them to be shaved, as a groomer, you go ahead and do it. All of those rules, again, go out the window, and we do what is right for the pet and their health. Another exception, it kind of falls into the medical, is for our older pets. So I make some exceptions with some of the older Pomeranians that I work with because they've been shaved all their lives, their coat's already broken, and now we have issues of they can't get brushed anymore, they're biting for the brush, it's uncomfortable for them. So just know that in terms of elderly dogs, we may make exceptions for that rule of thumb of who we give haircuts to versus who we don't give haircuts to for the wellness of the dog and for the comfort of the pet. So just be aware that sometimes our older pets we kind of treat a little differently than our healthy and well pets. All right, guys, short and sweet and simple, but very important. Hope this kind of clarified. I will say that I wish that someone kind of just laid it out like that for me when I first started grooming. Know that in grooming, we do follow rules, but there's always some caveats, always some exceptions. That is something that we should discuss and obviously look at those things logically and make the right choice. So if you guys have any questions, any comments, please put them down below. We are listening. Thank you so much for your thumbs up if you like this video. Subscribe for more like it. We really appreciate your time, and we'll see you soon.